Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of a man.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero. Today, Thad Russell joins me again. This time we talk ESG and leftist cronyism. We talk about the support socialists have for corporations and why that is and what we see coming. So, I think you'll really enjoy this episode with Thad Russell. He's always a pleasure to talk to and full of information. So, enjoy this podcast. But first, RyanBunting.com. For all of your graphic design needs, go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great libertarian and a great anarcho-capitalist. He's also a great graphic designer. He designed my podcast logo and Pete Quinones' podcast logo for Free Man Beyond the Wall. And I hope Pete never changes his logo so I don't have to change my ad read. So go to RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. And thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Enjoy the show. All right, I am here with Mr. Thaddeus Russell. How are you doing, dude?
I'm pretty good, man. How are you?
I'm good.
All right.
I'm busy. I'm really distracted by all this mandate stuff coming down from OSHA.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really reignited kind of my opinions about this ESG that we're doomed to talk about. So it's not a subject I find particularly friendly. It kind of black pills me when I talk about it because I'm just like, there's so few people talking about it. People don't like really look at it. So it's one of those subjects I'm like, oh man, like this is so important, but nobody really wants to dig into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of yet to be seen how important it will be. I mean, that depends on what the governments do. Although actually I take that back. I mean, it really depends on like what the culture does with it. So, you know, when you have these rules handed down from some institution like corporations or some corporate body, you know, doesn't actually in a sense matter if it becomes law. What matters is if it becomes a norm. Right. And if people just follow it sort of without even thinking about it, because if it becomes cultural, like, you know, like putting a BLM sign on your corporate website, like that becomes the norm. If you don't do that, you're not okay. So, I mean, if ESG becomes the norm, then we're fucked with or without government intervention.
Right. And that's what freaked me out about it was because some of these banking institutions were already implementing it. And so it's like, okay, like Merrill Hedge, they were already implementing it for people with 401ks and their investors. And it's like average people have 401ks. You're calling average people investors. So you're basically going after the average person with these scores.
Yeah. Well, that's it. So right. That is making it a norm if they're going after basically middle-class people. With this and imposing these norms on middle-class people voluntarily, right? These are banks doing this on their, which is sort of amazing. Like they're doing it. Why? Because that's what the market demands. The market demands a certain amount of social justice. Is this true? I mean, do we know this? Or why are corporations so bent on doing this? Are they convinced that their bottom line will benefit from this? From talking bullshit about race and social justice? Right? I don't understand it actually.
Well, they're pretty tight-lipped about it. They're not even talking about it. They're just implementing it. I know the SEC put forward a task force in March of this year to enforce the environmental social justice governance of these corporations and to keep these scores on private investors. In the book Shaping the Future of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Klaus Schwab describes it as the carrot and the stick kind of scenario, and that they're using the ESG as a carrot for the corporations to chase to gain more profits, right? And so they're they're sewing it up. And this is why you see this push. And this is what I was saying whenever I went on Pete's podcast and talked about this the first time, that health and safety is wrapped up in this. Like your COVID passport is going to be wrapped up in this. And then now that they've mandated the COVID vaccine for employers with over 100 employees, now you're seeing them really, really turn to the environmental and put all their focus on the environmental. And John Kerry just said the other day that all coal power plants will be shut down by 2030.
Okay, so I mean, the question again is why? For me, why would the biggest corporations be in favor of regulations that are highly costly for them? Right? It's not cheap to put solar panels in your factory. I think it's because, well, probably a couple of reasons. One is just, they think they would get more heat than it is worth if they don't do this stuff from the social justice crowd. But it's also regulatory capture, Tommy, right? This is a very important concept, so it is, as I just said, it's very expensive. Solar panels are very expensive. Guess who can do that? Only the biggest corporations. Right. So if you mandate this, right, in some industry, then guess what? You establish a monopoly. There you go. Bing. So it makes a lot of sense for the big corporations to demand these rules and these norms within their industries because they're the only ones who can afford them, not their competitors, not their upstart competitors. So it's a massive barrier to entry in their industry for competitors. So of course they love it. It's so crooked. This is just cronyism up the wazoo, man. And that's all it is. It's just cronyism. It's corporatism and cronyism dressed up as social justice.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. I had actually talked to Michael Rechtenwald about this a while back.
Yeah.
And I asked him what he thought about it coming from like a communist background and why he thought the left was like so on board with this idea. He was telling me, well, like once you monopolize all this and you push all the power to one center, you've radicalized the majority of the people, the average person. Your normies, your middle class out there are now radicalized because they're being, oppressed and regulated down into lower classes. And therefore you can basically mobilize more foot soldiers to socialize the economy. So there's no reason the left wouldn't be for it by moving it up to a central, like to identifying a central class structure that the middle class can target with their anger. It makes it easier for the socialists and the communists to recruit them and, carry out revolutionary standards.
So that's interesting. So I'm thinking about the New Deal, right? This was the last time this was a relevant issue. So the argument historically by the left about the New Deal is that the New Deal saved capitalism, meaning that it was counter-revolutionary. So as of 1933, when Roosevelt takes power, the Communist Party is rising in membership rapidly and getting to, by that point, by 1933, there's probably close to 1 million people in this country who are either members of the CP or at least very sympathetic to it, might as well be, members, they're actual communists. Like they think the Soviet Union is a great place and they think Joseph Stalin is a hero. That's what we're talking about. So, So along comes the New Deal, height of the Depression, unemployment's like 25 or 30% by then, bread lines, the whole 9 yards. And Roosevelt, as we all know, rolls out all these massive social welfare projects. Of course, it's not until the war and war Keynesianism that unemployment gets cut to a reasonable amount. But, nonetheless, New Deal intervention in the economy is what gets credit for it. But by 1941, there basically is no unemployment. So then that's when the CP and the Socialist Party decline rapidly in membership and in influence. Now, only a handful of Marxists and socialists during the 1930s opposed the New Deal, though. The CP, basically, except for a 2-year period, which is a complicated story, but basically, except for 2 years, during that time, the Communist Party absolutely supported and celebrated the New Deal. Most socialists did. And to this day, I mean, and this day, today, if you look at Jacobin magazine, if you look at Democratic Socialists of America, if you look at all the famous socialists, what do they talk about? They don't actually talk about socialism. You know what they talk about? They talk about the fucking New Deal.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about the fucking New Deal. So, and they know, the socialists are the ones who taught me that the New Deal was written. Those laws were written by corporations who came to the White House in 1933 and 1934 and 1935 and sat
Right.
down with Roosevelt's boys and said, okay, here's going to be the wages in our industry, which only we can afford. Here's going to be the prices in our industry, which only we can afford. Here's going to be the production quotas in our industry, right? This is the NRA, the National Recovery Act, and the National Industrial Relations Act, which was just a set of codes. It allowed the industries to basically establish these cartels in each industry. Anyway, so eventually that kind of Keynesianism on a military scale does work. At least there's no mass unemployment anymore, and therefore there's no reason for a communist insurgency to exist anymore, right? But yeah, man, I mean, except for a small handful of hardcore, true believer socialists, the left caved on this shit. They knew the corporations wrote those laws. They knew this was corporatism. They knew this was capitalists getting their way. They knew that, and they still know that. I mean, the smart ones do, and they still support it.
Well, there's a quote, and I don't know if he actually said it, but it's from the series Trotsky. Whenever that was on Netflix, I don't know if you ever watched it. It was really interesting. It was a good series. It was worth watching.
Yeah.
And there's a part in there where they're talking about social programs, like the Soviet government or the Russian government is trying to get the Bolsheviks to stand down by offering them all these social programs. And Trotsky basically says something along the lines of, we'll accept their social programs, but the ends is always the revolution. Like, don't get distracted by the social programs. You accept the social programs to weaken their stance and to strengthen your stance, not for any other reason, but to continue the revolution.
Right. This was probably the biggest argument on the socialist left for about 100 years. I mean, they pretty much stopped having this argument because of what I'm saying. The argument was between what used to be called reformism or gradualism and revolutionism, revolutionary socialism versus reformism. So there's this guy named Edward Bernstein, who was a German social democrat socialist in the early 20th century, who became associated with the reformist wing of international socialism. And so like Bernsteinism basically became Bernie Sandersism. It's the idea of being that you run for Congress or Parliament or whatever it is, right? Run for office, and then you pass a bunch of laws that nationalize this or that industry, and you just keep doing that and keep doing that and keep doing that until the entire economy is nationalized. That was the strategy. And then maybe from there you transition into some sort of more pure form of communism, but they didn't really talk about that. But for a good 100 years, the opponents of Bernsteinism were the Leninists, who said, no, man, you can't, capitalism is inherently evil and corrupt and will just turn it on itself. And you can't do that. You got to overthrow the whole system, root and branch, and you got to do it immediately, essentially. Right. And so Lenin was taught by Marx that Russia was the last country on earth that would have a communist revolution because it was a backward, primitive peasant fucking place, but Lenin was so impatient, needed a socialist revolution now. He hated reformism. He said, no, we're cool. We're going to jump the gun by about 100 years on this. And we're going to have it here instead of in England or in Germany where it's supposed to happen, right?
Right.
Or even in the United States was more advanced by that point in 1917 than Russia. But no, they went for it. So that was, and then they proved themselves right in a sense because they won. And that was the debate that continued onward, though, because in the Western democracies, like the United States and Western Europe, you had all these semi-socialist Bernie Sanders kinds of parties who were socialists essentially, but they were basically doing the reformist Bernstein route. And so they had this fight among socialists only about whether that was right, or whether it was to go the Lenin route, right? Whether to go the Fidel route or whether to go the Bernie Sanders route. And so, yeah, but today the left only talks about the goddamn New Deal. It's kind of pathetic in a way, because that used to be the only people who critiqued the New Deal. And it's like, as I said, this was a capitalist initiative. That's what the New Deal was. It was an initiative by the biggest capitalists in this world. And and to this day, that's who the left lionizes, celebrates their accomplishment, which is the new fucking deal. It's like, hello, these are your worst enemies, guys.
What do you think that's why they overlook like the Great Reset? They don't talk about stuff like that. Is it because they look at it as a global New Deal?
Absolutely. No, they love it. Yeah, I think they secretly love it, or are secretly very warm toward it. That's my feeling. I mean, I would have been when I was a lefty, when I was a socialist. I would have thought of that and been like, oh, it's a little bit wacky and they're a little eccentric and Klaus Schwab's kind of villainous. But the basic idea of coordinating the world's economies, under one roof makes a lot of sense. Maybe I would have been hesitant about like their corporate backing a bit, but in general, it would have been like a positive thing from any left-wing perspective. It's a positive thing for the consolidation of both capital and government, right? The global consolidation of capital and government is always a good thing from a left-wing perspective. They always want further centralization of both those things.
Well, because then you only have one institution to take over.
Bingo. Exactly. Precisely. It simplifies the job.
Yep. Right. Yeah.
Yep.
You're not consolidating the capital and the governance. You're consolidating enemies is what you're doing. Yeah. You're making it easier for you yourself.
Well, Marxists would also say you're consolidating the apparatus itself, right? So a state is essentially a set of apparatuses, right? It's the machine. It's the machine. Like, to me, the government is the people who run the machine. The state is the machine that gets run. So, it's like, it's the freeways and it's the prisons, right? And it's the guns, but they don't do anything on their own. They need people, and that's the government to activate them. I forgot, what was I saying? What was the point there?
Well, no, we're just talking about the consolidation and how the socialists look at this consolidation.
Right. So the state is an apparatus, or really it's a set of apparatuses. When it's in formation, it's kind of broken and decentralized. Like there was, like in the 19th century in the United States, there was like there was a sheriff over there in that town, and maybe a sheriff 100 miles away, and nothing in between. And there was these laws over there, and right. So like to seize that whole thing and make it, to monopolize it, is hard. And this is what Napoleon was all about, by the way. Napoleon understood this shit. He basically invented modern imperialism, because the Napoleonic Code, that's what that is, right? It's an attempt to homogenize the laws of the earth, because he spread the Napoleonic Code, the law, to every country he conquered, including in Haiti. To this day, Haiti has the Napoleonic Code in its law. So that was an attempt to simplify and centralize the world's apparatuses so that he could better take them over. And that's exactly what the globalists today are doing. They're doing the same thing Napoleon was trying to do 200 years ago, which is something that should be said, by the way. I mean, the Napoleonic Code is actually I think that's a useful comparison to make. It was absolutely an attempt to homogenize and regulate all of the Earth's legal systems, which is exactly what they're trying to do with the EU and all the rest of it.
Yeah, it gets really dicey, because you're trying to interpret exactly what they're trying to do. They're basically telling you what they're trying to do, but they're speaking such convoluted language. It's like they're talking to another type of people. They're telling you, like, they say things like, you will own nothing and you will be happy, or we're going to shut down all coal production in 2030. And you're like, you can't like possibly mean like literally. Like, what are you actually trying to do? Yeah. And when you start looking in, I discovered this through James Corbett, who you're very familiar with, and was when you start looking at the environmentalism that's going on around us, it's all the biggest oil and gas companies that are investing in environmentalism. So what they're doing is they're just cornering a new market. It's just another type of cronyism. And I wrote an article with the Libertarian Institute about this when they first announced the Green New Deal. I was like, this isn't nothing new. This is just new cronyism. They're just moving it to a different place.
Nice. Man, like, why Why is the Libertarian Institute the only place where that is said? Like, it is so important and obvious to
Because it's
me.
the only place where you can find me.
I know, clearly. Tommy, that's a really, really devastating, man. Send me that. Send me a link to that. I'm gonna tweet that.
I will. It's from a while back, so I'll have to go back and find it, but I can find it
That's
for you.
killer, man. That's killer. Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it certainly ends up there. Maybe that's not the intention of AOC and Bernie, but it certainly ends up there. Who do they think is going to run all these things?
Right.
Right. I mean, the federal government doesn't have the capacity to run all that stuff. I mean, the only people who have the capacity to build all that shit, with that many people, are the big corporations. I mean, the feds they don't have the number, they don't have the staff to oversee that. They don't have the productive machinery to do that. They have to buy all sorts of machinery and gear. I mean, they can't do it.
They don't even have the desire, because nobody looks at it that way. When you look at these OSHA mandates, one of the first things I said, I was like, this is blatant cronyism. This is like the ACA on steroids. Instead of you using the government to funnel money to medical insurance providers, you're directly instructed to pay big pharma, whether it's to get a test or whether it's to get a vaccine.
Wow. Yeah, well, the left loves corporations these days. Speaking of big pharma, right? I mean, the left is fucking they love Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson and Johnson. Go figure. I mean, I was taught by the left that those were the most evil of all the corporations. That corporations were the most evil institutions, and those were the most evil of them.
Yeah.
How many movies have been made about the evils of big pharma? This is the left taught us this, and the left was right. By the way, the left was right. They have been disgusting vampire parasites, crony capital corporatist parasites since their birth. And now all of a sudden we're supposed to do whatever they tell us to, including shutting down our society. So, but the mandate, man, talk about corporatist cronyism. And they'll even force children to take an experimental drug. That's how deep it goes. I mean, they're forcing children, Tommy Salmons. They're forcing fucking children to take an experimental drug. Like the fucking state, the government, the state forcing the public school children in San Francisco, which means the working class and poor kids, they're forcing them. Wow. Like, okay. So the education is compulsory. Okay. Forced. And once you get them in there, guys, this is, you force a fucking needle in their arms? All right. Now, I happen to believe that it is most likely that a vaccine is harmless. All right. But the principle of the motherfucking thing is really no different than you name your totalitarian regime. Yeah. The principle is the same. Thankfully,
I don't believe it's harmless, and but I have reason not to believe it's harmless. I know.
When I say harmless, I mean I know about the myocardium and all that stuff. I mean, like,
no, but I know people that have very bad reactions to it. Like, mostly women, and that's what gets me. It's everybody I know of personally that has had a really bad reaction to this vaccine has been a woman, and it's like,
actually, me too.
Wow,
me too.
It's like, wow, like, what the hell?
Woman right here had a bad reaction. That's right.
Yeah. My wife's sister hasn't had a period in like 2.5, 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. My cousin ended up in the hospital with heart problems. It added on to an already bad heart condition she already had and put her in the hospital for 15 days or something like that. My aunt ended up in the hospital with a horrible bladder infection, I don't think it was bladder. I think it was something else. But, and so did one of her good friends. One of my mom's really good friends that she's known for a long time ended up with a blood clot in her lungs. And she'll be on oxygen. She's 65 years old, was in great health, didn't smoke, didn't drink. Well, I think she drank, but she didn't smoke. And she's going to be on oxygen the rest of her life because she's got this horrible clot in her lungs now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't even matter. If there were 0 reports of adverse reactions, I would still be opposed to the whole goddamn thing. But I guess I'm just it's the corporatism of it. Like,
Yeah.
it is the most grotesque form of corporatism because it's just to stoke the profits of these evil corporations who have been parasites, as I said, their entire lives as corporations. And then forcing kids to stoke those profits. I can't, it's truly, I mean, since Vietnam, I don't know, what's been more evil done by the government?
Oh, I mean, I don't
in this
know.
country?
We could always talk about Yemen, which is one of the
Yeah.
worst things ever.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's right up there.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's right up
Certainly
there.
domestically, it's got to be. I mean,
Oh yeah.
and I don't mean just the vaccine mandate. I mean the whole COVID
I mean,
response. Yeah.
the entire response is right up there with the flooding the inner cities with crack. You know, I
Yeah.
mean,
Mm. I think
it's
it's bigger. I think it's bigger because
it's probably bigger as far as being broad, but I don't. I
yeah,
mean, as far as the damage being done,
yeah,
into the
and the
and they're using it as a template to label people as domestic terrorists, which is, I mean, you're one step away, really, by calling you a domestic terrorist for not being vaccinated. You're really one step away from calling a person a bioweapon, a bioterrorist,
sure,
just for walking around unmasked and unvaccinated.
sure. Yeah, I've been one of the things I've been really puzzled by is how many doctors they brainwashed. Um, and I don't. Maybe I shouldn't use the term brainwash. I mean, I guess I just want to understand, and I really want to understand. I want to ask doctors, like, I mean, they know that, they know things like that the vaccines are leaky,
Mm.
that ivermectin at least has been used, by many, many people, and
Not
with
just
no
on
reported,
horses.
at least, yeah. I mean, they know that, and they know that masks are bullshit because they've always known that, and yet they pretend these things are otherwise, and I don't know how that happened because these are doctors. They're
Well,
supposed to be,
I was in the military. I was taught in the
yeah.
military. I went through bioweapons training in the military. We were
Mm,
taught MOP 1 is the only thing effective against the virus, airborne viruses. Like, and I work with people that are former military and they don't get this. And I'm like, wait. Like, hold on.
what's mop
The proudest
what's
part
mop
of your
one?
life was being in the military, and you don't remember that part of the training.
What's mop one?
Mop one is it's basically like full body gas mask, like what you
Mm,
see in the movies when they're walking into like a sterile environment kind of
gotcha.
deal. I mean, you're fully covered. You're not absorbing this stuff in any way, shape, or form.
Right,
You
right,
know, and you're taught this. I mean, there are filters and all these things that go into it, not a bandana. You know,
right.
what I mean, a bandana is not going to do anything.
Yeah,
You
I
can
mean,
put a bandana over your mouth right now, hit your vape, get a
yeah.
nice good
I
hit
mean,
off of it, and blow through the bandana. It's not
I
stopping
mean,
anything.
so I live a block from a big hospital in Oakland, and so I see nurses and doctors all the time, and I see them walking blocks away from the hospital, like all by themselves on the sidewalk with a mask on. So they definitely know that does nothing, right? But yet they do it. And I think that's probably just the good citizenship part of it, right? It's modeling good behavior, something like that. I don't know, but then the stuff with the vaccines, I guess, is really creepy, right? You have doctors insisting that children should get the vaccine when
Yeah,
I mean, what?
we know.
We know, we've been knowing, and like, by the way, remember that Indonesia story about the kids who allegedly died of COVID in Indonesia, which like totally justified the vaccine for kids mantra? This is
Mhm.
a few. Remember that? It was a news story that just popped up one day, like about 3 months ago, right when
Right.
Delta was and right when we were debating whether or not to get the kids vaccinated. Guess what? The New York Times has a story about this. Some reports of kids in Indonesia, and by the way, only Indonesia to this day has reported children dying in any significant number from COVID. And I still haven't seen any follow up on that. But that totally justified the whole push to vaccinate kids. People forget that, and I want to follow up on that. I want someone to go follow up on the sources, check that journalism, because I'll bet you some money, baby. Especially Indonesia. Are you kidding me? You went to a third world country to concoct that shit. Like, come on, guys. You couldn't even go to like Europe to like make up some story. That's too easy, man. You can for $10 you can get a whole village to tell a story. Right. We know this. Come on, guys. We know this.
Well, but they'll cover that, but they won't cover the fact that India basically eradicated the virus by using ivermectin.
Yeah, right. There's that too. Right.
So, and it's very. I think, and I don't know. I'm very paranoid, and I kind of tie these strings together that may not belong to be tied together sometimes. But it's almost like this whole Syria gas attack with Assad, and how many people believe that, or it's almost reflective of the people that believe the Indonesian story.
Mm-hmm. It's the same crowd. Yeah, it's the exact same people.
Right.
Exact same people. Which isn't that interesting? Like, why is it that the exact same people who believe that Assad gassed his own people are the ones who believe that a bunch of children in Indonesia died of COVID? Like, what's the connection there?
Yeah.
The connection is do-gooderism.
Yeah.
That's what it is, right? And in both cases, it's our justification to intervene in other people's lives.
Yeah.
That's what it is, right? With Assad, it's our justification to drop bombs and invade with the Marines and whatever else we want to do. Inside Syria, and with the other one, it's our justification to intervene in the fucking lives of children and force masks on what we just did, put masks on them all day long in school, which while all the adults in New York City are walking around, by the way, maskless in public, but all the kids in school, what? Okay. And jab them in the arm against their will and against the will of their parents now. I mean, it's America's totalitarian moment, Tommy. I've been saying this for a while now. We've always had fascist impulses and we've had fascist moments. This is it. I mean, I hope it doesn't get worse, but this is the one moment in American history in my lifetime since 1965. I'd say 9/11 is the other one, where America turned decidedly toward a fascist culture, where it really was a fascist culture, where you were punished for any sort of dissidence. After 9/11, it was, of course, saying anything other than kill the Arabs, basically. You got punished. And now you get punished for all sorts of things.
Are you at all surprised that it turned so quickly onto the citizens of the country, and it happens to be coming from the left? Because part of me is kind of shocked that it was the left that allowed it to turn that way. Yet I look back just over the last 5 years and I'm like, okay, well, I should have seen that it was the left that was going to do it.
Yeah. The left so I guess this is an important history lesson. The left in this country, do I want to say this? Yeah, the left in this country has always been more authoritarian than the right in this country. That's not true in other countries. Before my socialist friends send hate mail to me. In other countries, obviously, there have been extremely authoritarian right-wing movements. Right. In this country, though, the right wing has been relatively toothless. I know that sounds weird in a country that had segregation in it, but that's not segregation doesn't count because segregation was supported by everyone, including liberals, for a very long time.
Well, it was pushed by businesses.
I'm talking about semi-fascist or fascist. I'm talking about nationalists, extreme nationalists, heavy-duty authoritarian, not just racists. Not to diminish that, but I'm talking about a nationwide authoritarian movement that's seeking a totalitarian regime, not just affecting one portion of the population. So the left, on the other hand, was during the 20th century in this country was supporting, basically most of the left was supporting extremely authoritarian regimes all around the world. So you had them supporting every one of them, you name it. you name it, including Pol Pot for a little while. Even in the 1970s, there was there was a portion of the left in the 1970s supported Pol Pot, who was at that moment slaughtering 1 million of his own people in Cambodia, at least 1 million. So I think it was more than that. What am I saying? I think it was way more than that. But anyways, in the millions. So, Soviet Union, Communist Party supporting the Soviet Union from beginning to end without wavering once on that. Trotsky, I mean, my parents' lineage, the Trotskyists, they're considered like the good guys in this, but Trotsky was a bloodthirsty murderer. I mean, he ran the Red Army, for God's sake. He slaughtered the anarchists at the Kronstadt during the Kronstadt Rebellion. He mowed them down with no hesitation. These are authoritarians. And of course, I just was in my boxing gym the other day, and there was this woman wearing a Che t-shirt. It continues. It goes on and on and on. Fidel Castro, they think, was a very good guy. They apologize. They're not celebrating the Kim regime in North Korea, but they apologize for it all the time, and they won't criticize it. They won't say it's totalitarian. And the problem with China, according to them, is that it's too capitalist.
Right.
That's the problem. And again, the Maoists in this country, not a majority, but they've always been around. And what did they do? Good Lord, they championed the greatest murderer of all time, Chairman Mao. So, no, it's not surprising at all that they were the ones who had emerged as the leading authoritarians at this moment of crisis.
I don't know. I think once the FBI got them on their side, it was done. And that's part of the reason I think freaking Trump was a psyop, is because it was like once the left was on the side of the FBI and the CIA, everything's been downhill from there.
It's an amazing. Well, that's another thing. When you now have the left, even when I say the left, I mean, who was in on the Russiagate thing? Who supported Russiagate? I mean, Bernie Sanders did. AOC did. You have Democrat, maybe not the Trotskyists, maybe not the anarchists, but the Democratic Socialists people, they thought that Russiagate was real, and and they thought the intelligence services agencies were correct and the FBI was right, and they sided with the FBI and the CIA.
Yeah.
That portion of the left, which is the biggest and most influential portion of the left, by the way, that's who is at Jacobin. That's who is at The Nation. That's who staffs MSNBC. It's the DSA people. It's the Democratic Socialists. They were in alliance with the goddamn CIA.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, and so they're in alliance with right now. Oh wow, that's something to be said. Right now, the American left is in alliance with Pfizer and the CIA. Holy crap, man.
Yeah.
That's something. I don't even know. So I mean, and why? Because those are the great centralizing forces in world history. Are the Central Intelligence Agency, right, which has done more than anybody or anything to bring the world's governments into one.
Right.
And the big multinational corporations.
Yeah.
Right? That's who has centralized the world's economy.
And to me, they're one and the same. I don't know if you've read the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, but I mean, he basically shows you how these international corporations are just the utility belt of the CIA in order to get countries to bow to their whim.
Right. Yeah. The state uses them, not the other way around. But yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Can you do me one favor? Like, you're bringing up these leftist organizations, and for people that don't listen to you regularly, they may not understand the difference between a Trotskyist, a Maoist, and a Stalinist. Could you explain that, break that down just a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, 1917, right? And so that was when Lenin and Trotsky were the leaders of the Bolsheviks. They became the leaders of the Soviet Union. As I said, Trotsky headed the Red Army, the military, and Lenin was the head of the whole joint. And they and their compatriots ran the Soviet Union for about a decade. But then in the 1920s, Stalin, who was younger, rose in power, rose up the ranks of the Bolsheviks. And by the 1930s, he had enough power where he held show trials and put all his opponents on trial, essentially, for trumped up charges, and then had them executed or exiled. And Trotsky was exiled, and he had his own followers. And so they hated each other, the Trotskyists and the Stalinists. And of course, Stalin took control of the Soviet Union. But really, if you look at their ideas, they were identical as to what they were about. They were about a Marxist proletarian revolution led by an elite cadre of revolutionaries like themselves. They were for the violent suppression of political dissidents. They were for the elimination of free speech and all that stuff, right? And for the collectivization of the economy, right? There's no difference. But the Trotskyists and the Stalinists hated each other. The good thing about the Trotskyists, and this is my parents were Trotskyists, the nice thing about them was that they were always outside of power. They never held power anywhere. So they were critics of the Soviet Union. They talked about the Soviet Union as being like this deformed monster of a socialist state. They said it wasn't real socialism. It was state capitalism, they called it. But I learned to hate communism, capital C, from Trotskyists, from my parents, meaning the Soviet Union. Like the Soviet Union, I never heard anything except bad things about the Soviet Union and Cuba and North Korea. So that was really nice about Trotskyists. But, if they ever got power, off with your head, Mr. Sammons. I mean, right away. And there won't be any tears shed about it either.
Yeah,
seriously.
Weren't they a little bit more brutal as far as their line of thinking, the Trotskyists?
I mean, they all are. I mean, the Stalinists and the Trotskyists are all have no problem with prisons and beheadings if it serves the revolution.
Yeah, I always understood the Trotskyists as being more brutal and more global, whereas the Stalinists always came across to me as more national.
Yeah, well, Stalinists are just, when we say Stalinists, we just simply mean members of capital C, capital P communist parties, all of whom were formally aligned with the Soviet Union and were directed by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, through the Communist International, directly controlled the communist parties in every country on earth for about 60 or 70 years. So the Communist Party of the United States of America was directly controlled by the Soviet Union, by Joseph Stalin.
So when the Vietnamese were like training the ANC in South Africa, up in Zimbabwe and other African countries, that was directed by the Stalinist movement.
It was directed by the Kremlin. It was directed by Moscow. Yes.
Gotcha.
Directly. Yep.
Okay. And so when you talk Maoist, like what would be the difference there? Like, is there any difference?
Yeah, there's some major differences. So Maoist, obviously, it's Chairman Mao, the leader of the Communist Revolution in China, and he became the leader of Communist China for many decades, and killed 30 to 40 million, who knows? I mean, tens of millions of people through forced collectivization, mass executions, et cetera, et cetera. Maoism as an ideology is different than European Marxism in a few ways. First of all, most importantly, it relies on the peasants, the agrarian peasants, to be the revolutionary force in history rather than the industrial proletariat, the working class, which is convenient because China, of course, circa the mid-20th century, was a largely peasant nation, so they needed a theory that justified taking over.
Right.
It also relies on shaming, a lot of sort of personal coercion, psychological coercion, I should say. So a lot of, hauling people out of their offices and putting them in dunce caps on the street and labeling them capitalist rotor or something, and then having people spit on them and make fun of them and run them out of town, and you see that now in the American left. The American left these days loves to shame people. That's their main, means for social justice is to shame. So that's very different than European Marxism. They don't like that stuff at all. They think that's silly or counterproductive. But at the end of the day, Maoism still is about essentially the forced collectivization of all people under one government as one government, as one governing body.
Okay. All right. Well, let's have some fun. We've talked enough like serious shit. I want to have some fun because we
right.
brought up Trotsky like 3 times now.
Yeah,
I keep chuckling because I can't get over the line that Scott dropped during the debate against Bill Kristol when he mentioned Trotsky and turned to Bill Kristol and he's like, "No offense." Like that was just that was classic.
Yeah, it pissed him off. It pissed off Kristol though. I think strategically it probably wasn't the best move. I mean, not that Scott said anything that I thought was, of course, like below the belt, really, but like he said like 3 or 4 things that were like
he gave Kristol an out. He gave Kristol an out because
they weren't friendly.
Right.
That's what I mean. They were not friendly.
He gave him that out. He gave him that out that he took at the end where he was like, well, I didn't know it was going to be a personal attack. And so when Scott brought up the think tanks and when Scott said that about Trotsky, that gave Kristol that out to be like, oh, well, he's attacking me personally. He's not arguing the subject.
Which is true because, I mean, that is irrelevant to Kristol's career. Like the fact that his dad was a Trotskyist, because Kristol himself was never a Trotskyist. His dad was.
Yeah.
So it was not even really that fair. I mean, because you can't blame him for what his dad did. You can blame him for what he's done.
But, it was still laugh out loud.
I got to plug in my... Hey, Tommy, do you want to pause for a second? Just got to plug in my machine.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Hang on one.
But, yeah, no, it was a lot of fun watching the Kristol debate with Scott Horton all together, though. I thought it was interesting to see that because Scott was able to say some things that I know you'd probably like to say to Warhawks and I'd like to say to Warhawks. So it was cathartic, even though there were moments where you're like, oh yeah, you're kind of giving him an out there.
Yeah. See, I guess I don't really have that kind of hatred for those people. I guess I maybe once did, but I was thinking about Kristol when I was watching that as sort of a sad figure, actually. I certainly vilify and demonize the guy's ideas, and most certainly the policies that came from them. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think he was 100% wrong and murderously so on many occasions. But, I guess I want to say, like, he's a true believer. And I cut true believers some slack, meaning that he really believes in his heart that, like, the Iraq War was better for all of us. Like, I do think he thinks it was best for me and you as Americans. Like, I really do think he has us in his heart. I think he's wrong, but it's not. I don't think he means us harm. I think he means us well, actually, and I think he was trying to improve our lives. He obviously didn't. I think that's pretty obvious. I don't think the Iraq War. I don't think it's hard to argue that the Iraq War improved our lives in any way. But yeah, and I also just see him as like kind of a sad dude, in that like half the world hates his guts. I mean, it's his fault, but I don't know. I don't know what to say about Kristol. It was great. It was great. I mean, let me look. I mean, like, it was great finally to give Scott that opportunity to lay out the case. And I thought Scott did a beautiful job. I mean, that was as comprehensive as you could get.
Nobody could have done a better job.
It was overwhelming. No, of course not. And I also think, by the way, that Kristol, I said this in Texas to Scott, I thought that Kristol made a decent argument. Like, I don't think it's dismissible. We have had relative peace since the United States took over the world.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you got to deal with that argument. It's sort of a counterfactual, but still, like, it's true. I mean, it is relatively far more peaceful now than it was before. So, and it's been 70 plus years now. That's a big deal, right? That's a big deal that we on the anti-war movement need to deal with. We have to have an answer for that. We have to have an answer for that.
Yeah.
That's all.
You know what I'm sensing though? I'm sensing that you're developing this thing that you hate so much. Empathy.
What's that? Oh, empathy for Bill Crystal. Yeah, no, you're right. That could, yeah, right. It could have just all been projection for me onto him about shit. I don't know. That's inside of me. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I guess I think that hatred of one's political opponents is not useful. I don't
Probably.
think it gets us anything. Yeah, and again, like as you were saying, it gives them an out, right? It just gives them the opportunity to say, "Look, at these people, they hate my guts. It's a personal thing, so you can't trust
Right.
them."
Well,
And in a
what is
sense,
it when you
they're
get
right because hatred.
I was just
Yeah.
going to say, when you get in an argument on Twitter or on Facebook, as soon as somebody starts, calling you names, what do? Well, you're just proving I'm right, because now you're calling me names. Like you don't even have an argument anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like your go-to.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
we're having some
Well,
connection issues here.
hatred by definition. Yeah, I know. Sorry, I don't know if it's me or you.
I don't know, man.
Might be me. But hatred by definition is irrational, right? So if you're being hateful toward your opponent, you're being irrational in your perceptions of them, or at least in your stated interpretations of them. So you're going to lose your arguments.
Yeah.
I can switch internet for the remaining 8 minutes. Do you want me to do that?
No, we'll go ahead and call it an end. I don't want to keep
Okay,
you right.
cool.
I'm not going to keep you right up to the edge. I'm not going to be like,
oh, okay.
You owe me 3 more minutes, man. I got 25 seconds left, Dad. 25 seconds. I want my 25 seconds.
Hey, man. Well, I would understand it. I would understand it.
No, we'll do it again. Absolutely. I enjoyed talking to you.
Cool.
I know you got dinner. You shouldn't be stressed when you're going to dinner. It might give you heartburn or something.
Thank you. It will, yeah. The doctors recommend that. Along with the vaccine, they recommend not being stressed at dinner.
I'm being empathetic.
So much of the focus of my podcast is to point out abuses of power and how bad things have gotten and the direction in which we're heading as a society. And it can be a real black pill. I've partnered up with Richard Grove to offer my listeners an opportunity to sign up to his Autonomy Course. The Autonomy Course is designed for people looking for solutions, people that want to shape their own future, people that are not willing to be at the behest of large corporations or the United States government or the banking system. The Autonomy Course is designed for those of you who wish to have complete control of the reins of your life, who are looking to be successful, to thrive and not just survive, to provide for your family by utilizing your existing skills and learning how to market and sell those skills in order to be your own boss, or learn new skills in order to leverage that into a new career opportunity. So if there's a job out there you've been trying to get or you've been wishing you could get, but you just don't have the skills for it, the Autonomy Course is the place for you to start, to learn how to land that position, to learn how to market yourself better, to gain confidence, and to be surrounded by a community of like-minded people that will encourage you and help you along the way. So use my affiliate links and go check out the Autonomy Course. It could be right for you.
Be careful there. It leads to imperialism, Tommy.
All right, brother. Well, I appreciate your time, man.
Right, thank you.
Plug away real quick.
Oh, well, Renegade University.com. Everyone should go there. We've got more than 30 courses now. We've got about 20 instructors. Scott Horton's one of them. Jack the Perfume Nationalist is another one of them. A bunch of courses on a bunch of things. Got a bunch of new courses on 3D printed guns, how to make them, which are the most popular courses here. And got a course on Marx that's coming up, co-taught by Ben Burgess and me. So you get to come and argue with Ben and me. And that's going to be like half socialists and half libertarians. It's going to be a wild time. That'll be really fun. And then Unregistered is just, banging away every week. It's my podcast. It's my baby. So check it out.
Good deal, man. Well, we'll talk later, and I'll text you.
Thanks, Tommy.
About all that other stuff.
Awesome. All right, man. Have a good one.
Enjoy your dinner.
If you're gonna play this game of pick and choose, well, it's a game that was made for you to lose. It doesn't really matter how many times, it's the same old worn out stories, same old lines. They're all pointing dirty fingers in hypocrisy, bragging on their feats of mediocrity again. Never really making any kind of change, but they keep on getting re-elected, and I find that strange. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. Yeah, I said fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. What's it gonna take for you to see that we're living in a rigged democracy? People stand in line for the views that they've been choosing, paying no attention to the rights they keep on losing. But they all gather in the rallies and they chant their names on goddamn well that it's all gonna be the same. Just 4 more years of war and taxes, 4 more years of them grinding down their axes. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. Yeah, fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken